I remember reading several years ago, a former Yale University president was giving some advice to an oncoming president at Ohio State. And this was what he told him. This was his advice. Always be kind to your A and B students, because one day one of them will probably come back and make you a really good professor. But be especially kind to your C students, because someday one of them will probably come back and build you a $2 million science laboratory. Isn't that the way it works? C students usually come through the most, I think, sometimes. Kindness. Well, let me give you a couple of examples of biblical kindness, and let's see if we can nail this concept down this morning. And then I want to close with some just very practical things that we can do this week that will help us exhibit goodness and kindness. The first story about kindness that I thought about in putting all of this together comes from the Old Testament. It actually comes from 2 Samuel chapter number 9. You may remember it. It's the story of a guy by the name of Mephibosheth. There's a good Bible name right there, Mephibosheth. I have people tell me all the time, well, preacher, we want to name our kids Bible names, but I've never seen a little Mephibosheth. I just never have. Mephibosheth. I don't know if you know the story or not, but listen to how it starts. 2 Samuel 9:1, David said, this King David, newly on the throne, is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him, what? Kindness for Jonathan's sake. In case you don't know this story, King David had been anointed king over Israel as a teenager. But Saul was ruling on the throne, and it just wasn't David's time yet. You do know that sometimes, even though God may have you lined up for something, it may not be your time yet. And that's the way it was with David. It wasn't his time yet, and so time had gone several years, but now Saul is dead, and David is on the throne. He is the king of Israel. Well, back in that culture, a little different than how we change power and presidents and such today. Back in the king culture, you know that most times kings were succeeded on the throne by their kids. Okay, son, and then son, and son, and son, and son of, and son of, and so on. Well, in the times that the throne changed hands to a different family, very often anyone who was left of the preceding administration's family, they were either banished or sometimes even just killed because they didn't want some kind of an insurrection for the new king. And so this day, David says, is there anybody left in Saul's house? Now, you remember that David and Jonathan, who was Saul's son, were the closest of friends. They were closer maybe than any two friends have ever been in the history of the world. And Saul is dead and Jonathan is dead. And so David says, is there anybody left in Saul's house that I can show kindness to? And one of his guys, I think his name was Ziba, another good Bible name, Ziba, said, you know what, there is. Jonathan has a son. His name is Mephibosheth. David said, well, go get him. Now, here's the thing about Mephibosheth. There had been a war when he was an infant. And the lady that was in charge of taking care of him, his nanny, if you will, and in running to try and save his life and get him out of the house before the roof collapses or whatever happened, she's carrying him, and she dropped him. She dropped him. And he was crippled from that moment on. He was crippled his whole life because of that fall when he was just an infant. So he's Jonathan's son, and he's a crippled man. And so David says, listen, somebody go get me Mephibosheth. Now, if you're Mephibosheth, and you hear the king wants you, what do you suppose the king wants? Well, not David. David, I want to show him kindness. And so here's what David did. He moved Mephibosheth into the palace. Right there in the palace, just like one of his own family. And he told Mephibosheth, you'll not eat even out with the servants. When we have meals, you'll eat at my table. You'll come and eat. It'll be just like you belong here the rest of your life. Kindness. Don't you know that there was not one meal that Mephibosheth ever sat at the king's table when he thought, wow, I deserve this. Buddy, that's right. I'm getting what I... No. Don't you know that every time he ever ate a morsel of food at the king's table, he sat there thinking, wow, I don't deserve this. I could have been dead just as easily as not, but the king's been kind to me. But what a great parallel that is for us in our lives. Because I spiritually was just like Mephibosheth was physically. I was crippled by sin. And the king called to me and bid me to come to his table. And can I just tell you this morning that everything I have in my life and everything you have in your life is not because we have deserved it or we have earned it. It is all 100% because of the kindness of God toward us. It's His kindness toward us. Kindness. Isn't that a great story about kindness? Well, I found another one. In Mark 14, starting at verse 3, these are on the screen. What do you think about this display of kindness from Jesus? Being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. Then she broke the flask and poured it on his head. But there were some who were indignant among themselves and said, why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they criticized her sharply. Look up here for a second. John says that the guy with the big mouth was Judas. Isn't it interesting how that Judas had the ability to look spiritual when all he was selfish? Jesus said, let her alone. I like that. Let her alone. Leave her alone. Can I put it in my vernacular? Hey, shut up, Judas. Just shut up. It's in the Amplified or something. I don't know. For you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish, you can do them good, but me you don't have always. She has done what she could. She has come beforehand to anoint my body for burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will be told as a memorial to her. And by the way, that's true because we're in 2010, San Angelo, Texas, and who are we talking about this morning? We're talking about Mary. What kindness for Jesus to look at those disciples and all those religious leaders watching that scene and tell him, you hush! Leave her alone! And He was kind to her. And He was so kind to her, He made her story world known until Jesus comes. Kindness. Kindness. Did you know that the Bible instructs us to be kind to each other? Listen to what Paul said in Ephesians 4:32. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. Hey, watch this. Kindness is not just a fruit of the Spirit. It's also a command. It's a command. We are to be kind. Listen to Colossians 3:12. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness. There it is. Kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering. That list is longer. But we're focusing on kindness. Kindness. But I have to look around in my experience, both others to me, and sometimes, I'm sad to say, me to others. And I have to say, you know what? How many times are Christians anything but kind to each other? Much less people who don't know Christ. Several years ago, I tried to find it this week. My computer's down. I can't find it. Somewhere in my possession, I have an article I read years ago that was called, Why Are Christians So Mean? And the truth is that we can be. We can be. You know, they say that the average person who wants nothing to do with church feels that way because at some point in their life they have been in a church and they have been treated poorly and unkindly by Christians. And their natural response is, I'm not doing that anymore. Not doing that anymore. Why? Because we can be unkind sometimes. I wish it weren't true, but it is. I remember talking to someone who used to work as a waiter. He was a wait staff, that profession. I remember him telling me that he hated to work Sundays. He just hated Sundays. Because Sunday after church let out, here came all the Christians with their all dressed up. He said it was obvious where they had been. And then he said those people were the most demanding and demeaning and ugly people to the wait staff. And then they left pitiful or no tips. And he said to me, I hate working on Sundays because I have to serve Christians. Should that be? What a horrible testimony. And here's the thing. Somebody in Timbuktu can treat a waiter like that, and that we all get saddled with that reputation. That's just the way it works. Kindness. Kindness. Have you ever noticed how easy it can become to be unkind to people that we're the closest to? Have you ever noticed that? It's easy to be unkind to people we're the closest to. You know, if some of us spoke to our boss like we speak to our spouses, we'd get fired. If we treated our friends like we treat our family, we would have no friends. If we treated lost people like we treat church family, there would never be another person won. Kindness. Put on kindness, Paul said. Show kindness, the fruit of the Spirit.